Welcome to the GovComms podcast, bringing you the latest insights and innovations from experts and thought leaders around the globe in government communication. Now, here is your host, David Pembroke.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome once again to GovComms, the podcast that examines the practice of content communication in government and the public sector. My name's David Pembroke, and thank you once again for joining me, and thanks once again to the feedback that we've been receiving recently about the program and how much people enjoy it. In fact, I was at a presentation the other day here in Canberra, and after the presentation, someone came up to me and they said, "Really love the podcast." And that's as much as it really needs to be. If people do see us around and about, or they'd like to drop us a line, or they'd like to suggest some future guests, just drop us a line at info@contentgroup.com.au, because we would love to hear your suggestions and your feedback. Joining me today is Josie King, who is part of the Content Group team. Now, I'll leave Josie to tell you her history in just a moment and how she found her way here to Canberra. But before we get started, Josie and I are hosting a webinar, a free webinar on the 21st of November at 12 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time. And what it's about is getting your content right for 2019. The steps that we feel that you need to take to make sure that you future-proof your content for 2019. So that is going to be a fascinating conversation where we go through the steps that we would go through at Content Group to make sure that your content is relevant, your content is powerful, your content is impactful, so as that you are making a difference with the effort and energy that you are putting into your content creation efforts, which are now standard practice in most government and public sector organisations. So that's the free webinar, 21st of November at 12 p.m. Getting your content right for 2019, and that's brought to you with our partners at the Mandarin. So, to today's podcast, Josie joins me in the studio now, but Josie, you have an interesting background, an eclectic background. How is it that you got into the game of communications, and how, in fact, did you find your way to Canberra?
That's a really good question. So I started my career about 10 years ago, and I started at a social media company, or what was then known as word of mouth marketing. And of course, we know that social media is like a word of mouth, but in a digital space. So I was really lucky to really start my career at the start of when social media platforms were essentially being used for marketing purposes. So I was a community manager and ran branded communities for, some of the earliest branded communities for clients like Nokia, like BlackBerry. And through that role, I really kind of found a love and passion for helping brands tell stories and really engaging communities. Since then, I've worked at creative agencies. My last agency was Bardell Bogle Hegarty, which is basically a creative agency based out in the UK. And I spent the last 10 years essentially working in Singapore, across Southeast Asia, some global accounts. And I found my way to Canberra because my husband's Australian. So I thought, what better way to kind of move away from busy city life and come into a really beautiful space as Canberra. And of course, Content Group was the agency I sought after, because you guys are playing in the space that I'm really passionate about.
So, Josie, that transition then from the private sector to the public sector, how's that been for you?
It's actually been I would have to say that the transition hasn't been always smooth. I think in the first 3 months, it was definitely a bit of a learning curve moving from the private sector into the public sector, particularly from this aspect of stakeholder engagement. In the private sector, you see decision-making typically made by a single person, a head of marketing, for example. And of course, in the public sector, you have multiple stakeholders that you kind of have to engage at various levels and at various times as well. Having to get used to the feedback loops as well, the cycles of when things needed to be approved. So very much, I think operationally, I kind of had to learn a little bit more about how to manage, public sector clients.
But in terms of actually doing the work, have you found that it's quite similar, the way that you've gone about trying to break down the challenges and come up with the solutions?
I think my experience in Southeast Asia has really come in handy with regards to, say, content creation. You do find the same level of risk aversion in creating content with Southeast Asian clients as you do with government sector clients. I tend to find that in Australia, it is a lot easier to work more collaboratively, largely because obviously there is a different sort of approach to working here there is to in Southeast Asia. Yeah.
Okay, that's an interesting segue, because one of the things I wanted to talk to you about is this notion of creativity and imagination in the development of stories and content. You developed a presentation which has garnered quite a bit of attention here in Canberra. People have not only come up and spoken to you after you made the presentation at the conference, but then subsequently there have been presentations to other organisations who are really interested in trying to understand where is that line and how can they bring emotion and engagement and imagination and creativity into their storytelling, into an environment that perhaps may be seen as traditionally risk-averse and not wanting to get too far into that storytelling, emotional engagement approach. So maybe... Maybe just go back to, I suppose, to the beginning of the idea that you had around that presentation. What was it, and why did you think it was important?
So, recently I gave a presentation on social media and where I saw the future of social media for the public sector. And the topic that I spoke about was entertainment and how I saw the future of social media being within the space of entertainment, because entertainment essentially provides an avenue to cut through this very rational, very logical space that the government and public service announcements are typically play in. The main reasons why I wanted to talk about entertainment was that entertainment, of course, is one of the most traditional forms of storytelling. It's kind of the television that you watch, it's the films that you kind of that you fantasize around. And what I thought was a really interesting way to take cues from how Hollywood essentially are captivating audiences. So essentially apply that similar thinking into the way we want to captivate, we want to create awareness, we want to create raise salience for specific messages in government.
So break that down. How can you do that? And I think there are probably quite a few examples already of where governments have used entertainment, or government entities have used entertainment in order to tell a story. You know, for example, the police forces around Australia and around the world, they're particularly around Facebook communities, they're very entertaining.
Yeah, I think the first thing that's going to be the most important with regards to playing in this entertainment space is really having brand permission. So, quick shout out to Queensland Police, because they're doing a great job essentially engaging the communities. And they've essentially built a reputation for being authentic, genuine, funny, and they're doing a great job at essentially engaging this younger generation of audiences. So having brand permission is important, because if you're not, you're going to end up with a disaster, because you might be perceived as an older, a little bit more serious, conservative department, for example. And if you try to put just a funny, jokey video out there, people are going to take it the right way because they've never seen you play in that space ever.
Yeah, so it's consistency, really. It's having the permission, but then it's being consistent with your brand voice and your brand tone.
For sure. It's kind of building a reputation and doing it consistently over time.
So in terms of that, there is this sort of ongoing challenge around attention now, isn't there? That what we're trying to do is to actually earn a share of a person's most valuable asset, which is their time and their attention, at a time when they have almost infinite choice as to where they do apply that time and the attention. So how can government and public sector organisations be better at earning the right to a share of someone's time and attention?
Well, I think the first thing that I want to kind of address around attention is that I don't think attention necessarily is going down. There is this myth around social media content and how people think that social media content needs to be 5 seconds or 3 seconds. But I think it's a little bit of a situation where kind of the dog is chasing its own tail, because as platforms and as this myth around the fact that we have no attention, what it essentially is doing is driving content creators, it's driving us as brands and organizations to create these short content that then people watch and consume. And of course, because it's only 3 seconds, they will spend 3 seconds in your content. Another reason why I think that the low attention span myth is dead is because if you look at anyone's Netflix history, you'll see for sure that people are still spending time watching hours of content. So for me, the trick, or at least my advice to capturing attention, is to make sure that your content is relevant and it's engaging. People need to feel a reason why they should tune into you. So you need to provide a captivating reason why. So is it a benefit? Is it a value? Is it entertainment? Finding that space to play in is very important.
And how do you go about finding that space in a world that is now so narrow? People can choose the education, the information, and the entertainment that they bring to themselves through the devices that they own, whether it's a mobile phone or it's an iPad or a desktop device, or they could choose to attend an event in person or whatever it is. But people are now in control. So this notion of relevance, how do you find that relevance? How do you get to know and understand people in such a way that you will be able to get that attention that you're looking for?
I think knowing your audience is very important, and it's not just saying, obviously just looking at research, because your audience is a number. I think I've seen so many marketing briefs and communication briefs where audiences are whittled down to a age group and a demographic and just a gender. Your audiences are more nuanced than that. Your audiences are your family, your friends. Get to know who they are. Go to the streets, speak to people, go onto forums. One of the things that I encourage my clients to do essentially is to paint an audience persona of them and create multiple personas. Give them a name, give them a photo, give them a backstory. Are they married? What are their attitudes? What are the specific values they have in life? What makes them happy? What makes them sad? And then use these very human characteristics of your audience to essentially create content that's relevant to them, that reaches to them because it's human.
And then, moving back through that though, once you do have that persona in place, it's that link between the persona and the entertainment to create the engagement and the reaction. How then do you step through that process to go from I have a clear understanding of the audience to here's the solution that's going to really move them in the direction that I need them to move in order that I can achieve my objective? So
I think there's three kind of spaces with three things that you need to think about, which is going back again to your identity and your brand, your organizational identity. What do you have permission in? And then you find out what's relevant for your audience. What are the types of content they consume? What do they enjoy? Is it humor? What type of humor? Because, funny isn't generically funny. It's sarcastic. It's kind of dad jokes. And then, of course, you want to find the right channels and time of day to essentially engage them with. When is it going to be the most persuasive for you to engage with them? So you kind of trying to find a sweet spot between these three spaces.
So if we've got those pieces of the puzzle right, the channel selection is really an interesting one, isn't it? Because if trying to find that right place, that right time, through the right channel. And it could be an offline channel, it could be an event of some sort, it could be advertising, it could be public relations. It all depends on what the purpose of your communication is. Could be social, could be other things. How do you then go about understanding the distribution and the various distribution mixes that you need to apply in order for you to achieve your outcome? Again, driving back to this whole idea that we only do this because we want to achieve a business objective of some sort.
Yeah, so obviously one of the first things you need to be doing is to go to where your audiences are at. I always encourage clients to think about a mix of own platforms, so websites, physical spaces, databases that they can leverage off. So their own platforms are going to be very important to essentially kicking or launching this your campaign or your content. And of course, this earned aspect. If your content is entertaining enough, it's funny, if it's going to, if there's an aspect of word of mouth, then of course you want to be trying to see that with the press, trying to get pickup. So you've seen so many articles online about how a specific video has over 15 million views. It's because it's being seeded with the press. Nothing happens accidentally. And of course, paid media is really important as well, particularly because we now live in a time where, social media platforms are essentially a pay-to-play environment where if you just post it, nobody's going to come to you. So you have to get out there and you have to reach new audiences. I think in my personal experience, when it comes to launching a campaign, it's really important to start with paid advertising because you will need that little lift. You will need that additional reach in order for you to get noticed and for essentially the traction and, I hate using the word, but virality to essentially kick in. And some of it can be planned. You can have a media strategy that is completely planned, but there are aspects that you need to consider, particularly if you play in the social media space, which is what happens when something in the news is making headlines instead of your piece of content. So I once launched a campaign and it ran great for 2 days. We got a fair amount of views. And on the third day, MH340, the plane, went missing. And essentially it just killed our entire campaign because nobody wanted to talk about our funny video, even though it was a great video, because there were more important things happening in the world. So I definitely, with the distribution strategy, you need to plan for success and definitely plan for failure. And the failure, or our backup plan, was essentially to have a robust paid media strategy so that while there were additional, while there was this noise in the news feed, there were still aspects of a campaign that could cut through.
That's interesting. This notion of context and understanding context, that's a big event piece of impact on the context. But how would you normally look to assess the context of a campaign and take advantage of different peaks and troughs inside a contextual cycle?
So with regards to context, what you typically want to do is you want to essentially have a media plan that looks at specific things that could potentially happen. So there are best days for us to launch campaigns. Wednesdays and Thursdays are supposed to be the peak days for actually launching video content. If you're launching something that's recruitment specific, Mondays are a good day because that's when everyone apparently starts looking for jobs according to LinkedIn. So in terms of how you plan, you want to have essentially a calendar in mind and planning against that.
So what are you seeing at the moment that are going back and circling back to this idea of entertainment? What are the things that are working at the moment that you see that you think this is a nice idea that more people should be looking at?
So I think a great piece of content that I've seen recently essentially is the campaign that the New Zealand Water Safety Commission essentially launched, and it's called the Swim Reaper. And what I understand of this brief is that this is a brief specifically targeted to young males in New Zealand during summer times because there is this culture of drinking and then going to the beach or doing kind of sea-related activities, water-related activities, which is resulting in injuries and occasionally death. What the New Zealand Water Commission essentially did was they took a really tongue-in-cheek approach at this shocking statistic, and they created a character called the Swim Reaper. And the Swim Reaper is, of course, a play on the word the Grim Reaper. And they created this character, this persona, an Instagram page for it, a couple of YouTube videos that basically brought to life this Grim Reaper that essentially loitered around beaches and water holes out to essentially get live. So it's very humorous. It's a lot of kind of black humor. And I think that I believe the Instagram account has amassed over 500,000 fans, and it's gotten kind of global attention. And for me, it said one thing of the organization, that they were unafraid of using humor. They're unafraid of being relevant and reaching out to their audiences. It would be very easy to hear of a campaign like that and think, oh, that's too morbid. No one's going to go with it. But they understood their audience. They understood that, 22-year-old kind of Kiwi males kind of really enjoy poking fun at things. They are sarcastic. They have a sense of humor, and they weren't afraid to show it.
Yeah.
And I thought it was a really successful campaign from them. They didn't have to plaster their logo everywhere, but the message really cut through in a humorous way.
So if you're trying to build that confidence where senior executives will back an idea, what are some of the things that you do to try to upsell and build confidence and help people to understand that by taking risks, they can make headway?
I think firstly, an element of evidence is going to be quite important. So look at case studies of what has worked, not just within your country, but look outside, look at kind of global case studies. So the Singapore government does some really interesting work around emotional entertainment content as well. So see what's out there and see what works, show results for it. The other thing that I would think about as well is to bring the kind of senior executives along on the creative process so they understand the value of this. And of course, also starting small. You can always start small. You don't necessarily need a $5 million budget for a big campaign.
So what were some of the things that the Singapore government did in this space that impressed you?
The Health Promotion Board in Singapore ran a series of really impressive campaigns that were targeted essentially at kind of older Singaporeans. And these older Singaporeans didn't speak any English, or maybe they weren't as fluent in English, and most of them spoke their own dialects. And there are over, 10 or 15 different kind of Mandarin local dialects that they might speak. So they really had a challenge kind of reaching out to kind of an older demographic, particularly when they wanted to educate them on things like awareness around, say, dementia or any sort of kind of related illnesses. So what they did was they knew one thing about their audience. They knew their audience loved watching television, particularly soap operas. So what they essentially did was they build a series of campaigns or using a soap opera kind of style of entertainment to educate these older seniors. And it really worked. It struck a chord with them because, again, it was speaking to the style that they were used to and familiar with.
Yeah, right. Okay. But it seems to me then that you're suggesting that that really are government stories, and when we're talking about them now, like the New Zealand example, that's a government agency speaking to an audience about behaviour. Singapore, again, different cohort, but same sort of thing, but both times using entertainment to tell a story. So are you suggesting that this is the path forward for government communication, that it must enter into this space and move away from the more, statistical, rational focus to a more entertainment focused?
Well, I wouldn't say that you should move all of your comms into the emotional space. I think there is a role for very logic-driven comms. I think where I see the opportunity is really playing with a mix of both. So there is a space, there will always be a space for posters that just give you kind of 3 tips. But there's also a space of telling a more emotional story, of connecting with your audience, of building your brand and connecting with your audience in that specific space.
Now, these are skills not necessarily not strong skills in government communication agencies. So, government agencies and departments. So how then should they go about acquiring these particular skills so as that they can tell these types of stories?
Definitely bring the outside in. And what I mean for this is not literally, but obviously having people at different perspectives engage with you, collaborate with you. With regards to creating entertaining content, who understands entertainment the best, but people who are actors, people who are in the music industry, people who are filmmakers. But one thing to obviously watch out for is that these people in entertainment might not understand how to work with organizations, governments, etc. So I think that's where agencies play a really important role. I see agencies as a Sherpas because they understand how to work with policies, they understand how to communicate in the government space, but they also understand how to link true creatives and bring them along in this space and really kind of leverage off their talents.
Okay. So if we were just to summarise and get your sort of key takeaways across this realm of, entertainment in government storytelling, what are your top key takeaways?
Key takeaways for entertainment is that entertainment is effective. It's not just about making people laugh. Based on an IPA UK study, they saw that emotional entertainment-driven campaigns are actually 2 times more effective at driving things like brand awareness and increase in salience. Entertainment is also obviously it needs to be you need to be guided along for entertainment. You need to have experts helping you create entertainment. It needs to be emotional. If you're not ramping up your emotional skill, you're not really doing entertainment right. And of course, defending your creative work is going to be really important as well. In the case of the New Zealand Water Safety Commission, it was clear that they defended their creativity, and that's a really important aspect because you don't want it diluted. You don't want it to turn into a situation where your logo slapped everywhere and it's so corporate. The tone of voice has changed. So keeping it pure is critical.
So, Josie, thank you so much. Those key takeaways really summed it up really well. And what I like, as I often like in content that I consume, it's the stories, it's the case studies, and two great examples there of government agencies being brave but being relevant to their audience. The first one there, the Singapore Health Agency, where they created soap opera to communicate to older audiences because they knew that that's where they would be. They would know that that's where they're paying attention. And so that was a solution for them. And that great example from New Zealand where, the swim reaper speaking to young males about not doing silly things around water after they've had too much to drink, and doing it in a way that cut through, and looking at the numbers that they've achieved, obviously a very, very successful campaign. So fantastic insights there, great experience from Josie, and you can just see why she brings such great value to Content Group's clients. Now, just a further reminder that Josie and I will be hosting a free webinar on the 21st of November at 12 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time. And what it's all about is getting your content right for 2019. Getting your content right for 2019 and the steps that you need to make sure you take in order to future-proof your content for success, or indeed give your content its best chance of success. So we'll have some clear and actionable advice that we'll be able to give to you. So on that webinar, again, 21st of November, 12 p.m, getting your content right for 2019. So once again, a big thank you to Josie King for coming in to GovComms today, and to you, the audience, for coming back once again to listen to us. So thank you very much. But for the moment, it's bye for now.
You've been listening to the GovComms podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to rate and subscribe to stay up to date with our latest episodes.